Yeah, thank you very much. All right, let's call the meeting to order. Apologize to everybody online and in the room for being late. I test that actually, and so thank you. Our first bill is House Bill 47 on gross Secretary of State expedited filings. Mr. Secretary, welcome. Senator Rothfuss, Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, House Bill 47, Secretary of State expedited filings, comes out of the blockchain select committee interim work. It's a relatively straightforward bill. It's something that came across our plate about the fact that there is not currently statutorily an ability for the Secretary of State to provide expedited filings under any circumstance, and that leads to problems when you have a situation where a company needs an action to take place on a specific date for legal filing purposes. There's no way to provide an assurance for that. And so we have things along the lines of mergers and acquisitions and other transactions where you need a date certain, and that has caused problems. So the request came, we picked it up and put together this relatively straightforward piece of legislation you see on page 2, that it just allows the Secretary the capacity for expediting the filing of any document filed pursuant to Title 1734 or Title 40, Chapters 1 and 2 of the Wyoming statutes, and then a maximum of $5,000 may be charged for that service. The other provision in here, which is important, is lines 15 through 17, that the expedition of a filing shall not grant any benefit over a non-expedited filing for purposes of the timing of filing. We talked a lot about that. So for example, if you're filing a new corporate name and you want it to be senatorcase.com, and then Senator Dockstader comes in the next day and files an expedited filing to capture senatorcase.com, realizing what a great website that would be, or corporate name, you would actually still have the timing of the filing ahead of the expedited filing. We wanted to make sure that this wasn't used in an abusive way, that it really was just for the purpose of getting things done as quickly as possible. So that's the purpose of the bill. Section 2, and I'll let Representative Singh speak to this. This was put on in the House. We had some discussion about the need for additional employees within the Secretary of State's business office during the interim. When we originally started the bill, we didn't have an appropriation and wanted that to come through the appropriations process, knowing that there'd be requests. But it looks like the House added a Section 2 to add an FTE for it. And personally, I'm just neutral on it. I understand the Secretary's need, but you all do as well. From my perspective, it is simply the Romanet 8 paragraph that is what we're interested in making sure gets put in the books. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Representative Singh. He can provide a little context for the discussion in the House.
Representative Singh, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So in the House, we appropriated an additional $93,179 from the general fund to the Secretary of State for an additional FTE for this express purpose. And so we see the work that's being done in the Secretary of State's office, and we want to make sure that we maintain that nationwide, well-known quality service that we have here in the state of Wyoming.
And Mr. Chairman, I will note
Back
that
to you, Senator.
the C paragraph on page 3 going on to page 4 indicates that if it's added in the budget, that it doesn't get double counted. So it's if there's a position in the budget, this one goes away.
Thank you. Any questions for the representative or the senator? Any questions, committee? Any questions? Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, I might have to leave and leave it in the good hands of Representative Singh. I've got 3 bills up.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's hear from the Secretary of State's office. Mr. Secretary, welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Got the whole team. That's good.
Yeah, well, we really trying to do all we can on this stuff. Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So can I start?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State. To my right have General Counsel and also our Policy Director, Joe Rubino. To my left is our Business Director, Colin Crossman. I want to say a few things about House Bill 47, which is substantially similar to House Bill 79 from the 2024 session. By allowing the Secretary of State's office rulemaking authority to set a fee and provide a process for requesting and approving expedited filings, the bill would in some ways ensure necessary sideboards to expedite service where appropriate, while ensuring that many of the office's regular statutory filing deadlines of 15 days remain operable. The result, I think, is another tool that will make Wyoming more attractive to business entities looking for regulatory certainty. There is at least some appetite for this regulatory certainty, and I think it's safe to assume that the passage of this bill will add to the exponential growth in business filings and revenue our staff of 11 full-time employees is facing. That said, as I did numerous times throughout the interim, I want to speak on this bill's administrative impact on our existing staff, its effect on our workflow, and frankly, my concern that this bill does add a duty and that we need to have a position in this bill. By way of background, our office saw a total increase in revenue over the last several years. About 75% of this growth in revenue is due to our exponential increase in business entity filings, the revenue increase we've seen. As an example of the growth we've seen in the past year alone, 675,000 filings we had in fiscal year 2024, up from 590,000 in fiscal year 2023, which is an approximate 14% increase. The corresponding increase in revenue in business division alone is a little over 50 million in fiscal year 2024, up from 42 million in fiscal year 2023, which is an approximately 19% increase. And again, we're one of the few revenue centers that the state has. We expect that this exponential growth will continue as Wyoming becomes more competitive and remains overall number 2 in the nation behind Delaware for volume of processing business filings. As recently reported, and actually there was another follow-up on it yesterday in Cowboy State Daily, we're actually number 1 in the nation, leading the nation for new business incorporations per capita. And a lot of times people say those per capita stats aren't a big deal, but for anybody to pass Delaware with the lead they've had since our nation's founding pretty much is a pretty big deal. And it made national news when we passed Delaware this year on per capita filings. Expediting business filings, no matter the volume, will inevitably lead to increased burden as it will require human intervention to expedite the processing of filings by a trained staff member in our office. We've really exhausted cross-divisional help. I mean, we have some folks in other divisions that probably are spending 40 to 60% of their time on business filing. So we just can't absorb anything any further. We're at the max. This informed our office's request throughout the interim to request additional staff with this bill. And we really appreciate the House for adding that section 2. As you'll note in C, if we do receive at least one position in the budget, this section 2 goes away. But I think it's really important that we keep this in the bill. Who knows what happens with the budget, and it's one position, and we really need it to be able to execute this bill. So that's our overall comments. Support it in its current form, and appreciate the committee's indulgence.
Questions for the Secretary from the committee? Any questions? Mr. Secretary, and maybe one of your associates will cover this, but what kind of filings are we expecting to expedite? What's the gist of this? Because it covers Title 17, Title 34, and Title 40, and Chapters 1 and 2, so that's pretty broad. So maybe if we could learn about that, that'd be.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll turn over to Mr. Crossman in a moment. I think broadly, there's a lot of big corporations that incorporate in our state, and for M&A purposes, when there's a merger, when there's an acquisition, for other purposes, they need to get something done by a date certain. Mm-hmm. And that's why providing that certainty is important. And I think, you just have people that procrastinate here and there as well. And so I'll turn it over to Mr. Crossman, but I think really M&A is where we're going to see it a lot.
Mr. Crossman,
Yes,
welcome.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. As the Secretary said, that is exactly correct. The primary purpose of this is to allow for, if an entity has a outside of Wyoming regulator that needs to have a document on file on a date certain and needs to see it in our record, those are the situations where this is likely to be used primarily. That's M&As, that's maybe a redomestication or a conversion. In fact, that actually, I said just a minute ago, I said outside of Wyoming regulator, but I can think of regulators that are outside of Secretary of State's office in Wyoming that might need to see that, for instance, the Gaming Commission or something else. If there's an entity that has to have something specific on file at the date that they are issued their credential or other certification from that agency, while the document is effective on the date we stamp it, it doesn't show up until we finalize it. And that finalization process is when we check it for errors, and then we go through that's the statutory 15-day deadline. So while the document is in our possession, it is active but not posted. And so that is the sort of the period of time where someone may wish to expedite that, to push it to the top of the stack. And as Senator Rothfuss mentioned at the bottom of this, lines 15, 16, and 17 of Romanet 8, the expedition of filings shall not grant any benefit. That specifically means that the filing stamp that we give upon receipt is still the canonical definition of which order of documents is legally accurate or legally authorized. But then we might choose by action of this law, if the person has paid the fee, to bump it up for the processing, but that doesn't change the legal activity of the filing stamp. So just because you paid extra doesn't mean you get bumped to the top of the activity stack, but not the top of the legal stack.
Questions for Mr. Crossman? Mr. Crossman, so would it be like, I don't know, a couple of questions come to mind. First, I do understand some of the filings that have a 15-day deadline, but there are probably other things that don't. I mean, I don't know the universe of things. So that's not all about 15 days, right?
Correct, Mr. Chairman. The vast majority of documents in the business division do have a 15-day deadline, but there are others that do not have a 15-day statutory deadline. Address changes and registered agents changes, for instance, they do not have that kind of a deadline. Trademarks, which are the Title 40, Chapter 2. No, Title 40, Chapter 1. I think 2 is trade names, but they have a 20 calendar day deadline, not a 15 business day deadline.
Right.
So there are some different deadlines. A trademark, for instance, is another document that I could see someone potentially doing an expedited filing to get it on the public record, the outside public record, so that they could institute an action or use that as evidence in a federal trademark application or something.
Yeah. And then so one more little follow-up there. In terms of like, say they filed their annual report, they pay all their fees, maybe it's a new corporation. The time that they can obtain a certificate of good standing, is that involved in this? How long does it take to where you can look them up and they have good standing?
Well, Mr. Chairman, it depends on how they have filed their organization. So if they file it, if they do the online system where they handle it 100% through our online portal, they can get their certificate of good standing immediately. If they were to send in paperwork to be filed, then it will be subject to our standard queue, unless they pay for the expedited filing. But in that standard queue, it could take a couple of days before we get to it. And not every entity type can be filed online. It's the four biggest ones, LLCs, profits, nonprofits, and limited partnerships can be filed online, and various subclasses of each one. But for instance, a unincorporated nonprofit has to be filed. And of course, that's a different kind of filing, but that has to be filed on paper. And there are others, statutory trusts, statutory foundations that have to be filed on paper. So a foundation or or a nonprofit is another one that if they needed to be formed relatively quickly and on the record, because they are about to start taking donations, that's another type of entity that might wish to have something expedited.
Anybody else? I don't mean to. Then with respect to the fees, and maybe this is back to the secretary, I'm not sure, but I read this right, maximum fee of $5,000. That kind of seems like a lot of leeway between, I can make a standard filing and in 15 days, I'll probably get results, but I want to speed that up. And you have rules that assess this fee, but it can be up to $5,000. That's pretty broad legal leeway. Maybe explain that more to me. Ms. Secretary.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with your indulgence, I think in a moment, I'll also ask Mr. Crossman to opine on that. You know, the way we've been envisioning this is that it would be a tiered system. Like most states do have expedited filing. Most states don't have a statutory deadline. And so they get back to you and they get back to you. Otherwise, you go into an expedited system. Now, we're kind of the reverse, and we're back-ending it with an expedited process. I'm fine with I want to keep the 15-day statutory deadline. I think it provides regulatory certainty. But just as a little bit of background there, but we're thinking of a tiered system. I mean, some of these businesses want it in an hour or 90 minutes or 2 hours. And in that situation, you know, they're willing to pay and for the service. And so we're thinking of a tiered system that would say, you know, a day is this, maybe even half a day is something, a day is something, 3 days is something, you know, maybe a week is something. With your indulgence, I'll ask Mr. Crossman opine because he's done a little more research on how other states handle this.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Crossman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To take our, say, the state of Delaware as an example, they have a fairly robust expedited filing system. For, I believe it's 1 or 2 hour service, they charge $2,000. For same day service, I believe it's either $1,000 or $500. For next day, it's a little bit less than that. And then for 3 day, I think it's their cheapest, which is I think like 100 or 150, something like that. So they've created this tiered system. So I envision something like that. And I believe the number of 5,000 was inserted in there as to allow us to adjust not only to what our costs are, but also to what other states are doing to see what, if Delaware were to raise their prices and we wanted to match them, if we can just do it in rule.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add one more
Go
thing
ahead,
on
Mr.
that.
Secretary.
You know, the cost and you know, I would caution on comparing the exact numbers. The other challenge we have is that, you know, we also have had staffing issues and it's been challenging. I understand the legislature has got to keep it tight, but we also need to control, you know, we can't just be flooded. We're not going to be able to handle it. And so part of it is that, you know, we're going to have this for certain situations, but it's going to be a little bit it's going to be on the little pricier side because we can't handle a flood of it. We got 11 people, Delaware has 110, and we have 75% of the work they have, and we have 10% of the staff. So it is going to be it's a little bit of you're an economist, so, you know, we got to control it a little bit through the setting of this, so.
Fair enough. And would it be fair to say that you're using the pricing system to control the demand rather than having it be cost-based? Would that be fair?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think they're kind of tied because if we can't if we can't meet our statutory deadline, we're not meeting you know, if we can't meet our 15-day statutory deadline, you know, and we made sure even when we had the powder scare and we got shut down, we were on day 14 on a filing and we came in and we got it done. I'm really proud of that. We've never gone over despite some of the challenges we've had on staffing. But, you know, Mr. Chairman, I understand the question. I'm not sure I'd characterize it the same way in that, but thank you for the question.
Fair enough. Mr. Crossman, and then we'll get to Senator Landon.
Thank you, Chairman. I did want to make clear that a normal citizen does not need to utilize the system unless they desire it. There will be no requirement. This 15-day statutory deadline will still be there. The only reason to execute on this is if you have a business case and you really need that document on the visible public record immediately. So normal people who don't have that burning desire to have it show up, they don't have to pay.
Gotcha. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and really appreciate the conversation. You know, I was sitting here this morning thinking, Secretary, that we've all served with you in a different capacity, and I'm just wondering if Representative Gray would be persuaded by Secretary Gray to add these positions, or in this case, to add a position. I just smile together with you. We've always worked so hard to be careful. So that's my question. Would Representative Gray go along with Secretary Gray?
Well,
Secretary Gray.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. It said it earlier. Yeah, I think I would. Generally, I oppose bills a lot of times with positions, but I didn't always. And I think this has hit the standard. I definitely think it does. And I think I would have supported it. I think it's going to bring in over time more revenue than it's going to bring in. We're already doing that. We're one of the few agencies that does that. And then you look at all the other things we're ramping up. We're trying to take on fraud. And we're doing more CRA audits, and those are things that we really need to have staffing to be able to do that. So I really believe I would support this bill as written. And frankly, I think without it, I don't know if the bill is operable. So thank you.
Thank you, Senators. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. This system is all digitally, you talk about a tiered system, it's all digitally tracked. That's my first question. My second question is projected revenues from this.
Mr. Secretary.
Well, Mr. Chairman, yeah, maybe Mr. Crossman at the chairman's indulgence will take you through the whole process on that. But yeah, you can have paper filings, you can have filings online. We've always had that. And so there's two options of ways to file on this. Obviously, if you do a paper filing, then it goes through our system, and we have those touches within the office. And so yeah, it's all digital. It's all through our system, which is getting a little bit older, but we continue to make it work. And projection wise, we believe it's going to pay for itself. I did have that up in my office on the pay for what that would be, but we do think over time it will more than pay for itself. That is just a projection, though.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Crossman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have multiple requests a month, probably in the order of 10 or 20 requests for expedited filings a month. And so I see that depending on what level or tier that these filings choose, it would pay for itself within 6 months to a year. Many of those are, please get this done today. It is very, very rarely do we actually get people saying, oh, I only need it in 3 days. Occasionally, but most of the time it's people who have a need to get it done immediately and are requesting that. And sometimes we can accommodate that right now, but much of it is there is no formal process. And so without it, there's no easy way to, we don't have a way of tracking it since we don't have a process for it right now. But there are, I would say that's actually going up in the last 2 years since I've gotten here as filings increase. And I know you may have seen in the media that there's some corporate reorganizations happening of entities choosing other states, coming to Wyoming, coming to states other than Wyoming as well, but leaving some states. And those kinds of things are the sorts of things that do need the expedited filings, because often what they'll do is they'll establish a domestic, i.e. Wyoming subsidiary, and then merge in instead of doing a redomestication or something like that.
Mr. Chairman, can I add one more thing on that?
Sure, Mr.
Thank
Secretary.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did want to note in terms of paying for itself, I know we're just speaking to the Expedited Filing Act itself. In terms of our broader business filings, our 3-position ask would pay for itself in the budget in about 4.5 business days. So this would pay for itself in about a day and a half. So of our broader business filing. So I just want to make sure when we're talking about a pay for on specifically this action, but broadly in terms of our business filings as a whole, this position pays for itself in about a day and a half.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question about the fiscal note and then the amendment in the bill. And if this was covered while I was out of the room, I apologize. But so the fiscal impact you have at 43,000 in the fiscal note we have. Then we have the amendment from the House that's 93,000, which is to be doubled and included in the standard budget, so it's 186,358. So could you please explain all of the different numbers we're seeing?
Mr. Secretary?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, and I'll turn this over to Mr. Rubino for a little more color on this in a moment. What we were intending to do was to insert a half FTE because specifically related to this, but you can't hire half a person. And broadly with the increase we've had and the need for auditing, we feel it's fully supported to add the one FTE. But so the reason why it's a lower number is because it was half of an FTE, and then I think the calculation got a little bit messed up. But it's for 1 year, and so that's why when you say it's doubled, that's for the 2-year amount. But then it's not quite half, and maybe Mr. Rubino can get more into that. I think that they estimated off the wrong pay scale. We're asking for the second tier person in our staff. We have tiers, in terms of seniority, and we need someone a little more senior to do these rather than the initial sort of entry level person. And so I think the half was initially calculated off the entry level, not the more senior. So it's supposed to be half. That what we were having was not quite right, but again, it's 1 year, so it's half of a half of a half. And then the starting point was a little bit not the right one. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Rubino to provide a little more color on that, but that's broadly what.
Mr.
we're at.
Rubino?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Steinmetz, yeah, the secretary hit it right on the head. That's exactly when our office received the fiscal note, when we have the fiscal note process with LSO, we had originally estimated about a half of an FTE. And at that time, the individual who sent the fiscal note, our deputy, he estimated at one of the lower tiers. We had talked about this extensively in the House Minerals Committee when this position was added, and then later in appropriations about really the appropriate level of employee here would be the BACA 08, the Senior Consumer Support Specialist. It is, as the Secretary noted, it is one of our more senior people in our business division. What came out of the conversation with minerals, with the House Minerals Committee and with the House Appropriations Committee, as this evolved, is we do believe that it's more appropriate for the BACA 08 to be really for this bill because these are complex filings. And to speak a little bit, not to go back too far, but to Senator Dockstatter's question about the process that this has and the impact that this has, is the manual intervention that this has. It takes a significant amount of time and resources that isn't just automated or something that a frontline registrar can do. It takes communication with, most of the time, their law firms. A lot of times they're law firms that we're either dealing with their counsel in New York City or their local counsel here in Wyoming and their original counsel, their general counsel for some of these C corporations. You're not thinking LLCs or anything like that, not to belabor that point, but these are more complex filings. And so we felt it appropriate as the conversation evolved and the amendment was put in there after we were speaking with House Minerals Committee, the House Appropriations Committee, and the Budget Department, that the final number was for the BACA 08, also employee benefits, hardware, the maintenance agreement, telecommunications, et cetera. So that sort of gives you in a nutshell, the evolving conversation that we had from the fiscal note process through our conversations with the Minerals Committee and the House Appropriations Committee on that, and why we landed at that number. But yeah, it's to speak specifically to how that goes in. It's effective when the bill is effective. So it's July 1st of 2025, and then it's only through to the end of the biennium, and then that's added on to the budget.
Sorry. My mayor passed away last night, unexpectedly. Yeah, I did too. So sorry. Sorry to be distracted. Senator Steinmetz, were you done with your question? Thank you. Any other questions? Any other questions? So have we resolved the appropriations, you think? Okay. Committee, thanks a lot. Shall we hear from public? See if there's any public testimony? Anything online? Anything in the room? Are you guys all here for this in the back? You look pretty formidable back there. Anything online? Okay, I'm not, committee, you've heard the testimony. What is your pleasure? Got a motion by Doc Stater. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Senator Landon.
Just real quickly, I did stop on the $5,000 figure, and maybe I should have asked the secretary while he was up here, but that seems kind of high. But then again, if we go ahead and place that figure in the statutes, we don't have to visit about it anytime soon, it doesn't seem like. But in looking at some of the other states, this does seem a little bit high.
And we did look up Delaware while we're here, and I don't know if this is their only fee, but for one hour service, which incredibly, it says completed within 1 hour of receipt, filing must be received by 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. They will complete it in 1 hour for $1,000. But they have some late hours apparently on the East Coast, which makes sense with the time zones. But anyway, other further discussion on anything? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, not to hang things up, that just seemed a little bit high. I don't know if we want to tackle it at all.
The committee's discussion is that it's up to, I'll certainly entertain a motion to reduce that amount, but I mean, you could look at it that these are 100% voluntary. If they want to avoid the fees and have relatively fast service, they can do everything electronically. I take it in some cases that's not possible, or there's hitches and back and forth. And so, but anything else? Anything else on the bill? I think we better call the roll.
This is a roll call vote on House Bill 69, or I'm sorry, on House Bill 47 engrossed.
Correct.
Secretary of State expedited filings. Senator Boner.
Aye.
Senator Dockstetter.
Aye.
Senator Landon. Aye. Senator Steinmetz.
Aye.
Chairman Case.
Aye. So good success here. We will refer to appropriations when we get read in, and you'll have to talk to our side of that. So thank you very much for coming and appreciate it. Representative Singh, it's really good to see you. So thanks for the good work. And we'll go to House Bill 69, which is a joint interim bill introduced through the House. And I'm sure that the Secretary of State's office is here for this, or committee, this was a joint interim bill. Senator Landon and Senator Boner were part of the discussion in the joint interim, and it really involves new language in 17, 16, 14, 20. And you can look in a new D, and this is under Part A. The Secretary of State may commence a proceeding under WS 17, 16, 14, 21 to administratively dissolve a corporation if any of the following has occurred. And there's, under one, it is in the public interest and the corporation, there's an A, B, C, D. D is going to be, is owned or controlled by a foreign government or foreign non-governmental person, that's a broad sense of person, determined to be a foreign adversary by the United States Secretary of Commerce and specified in 15 CFR 791.4A or a successor regulation, except if the ownership or control has been approved by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. And then you can see there is similar language being inserted in 17, 16, 15, 30, which is grounds for revocation under A. The Secretary of State may commence a proceeding under WS 17, 16, 15, 31 to revoke the certificate of authority of a foreign corporation authorized to transact business in this state. A, if Romanet 8, and there's a list of things, A, B, and this will be a new C. It's virtually the same language we just discussed in the last section. Similarly, in 17, 19, 14, 20, again, grounds for administrative dissolution. And I would imagine if we go back and track this, these are different corporate forms probably. So it's the same repeating thing in all these different corporate forms. And I think that's similar in 1729, 704, 705 on page 6 and page 8, 173904. It's just kind of conforming language to all the various different entity types that we deal with. So that would be the bill, and I certainly entertain the Secretary's office talk to us about this bill. Welcome back, Mr. Secretary.
Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State. Today I'm joined by Colin Crossman, the Director of our Business Division on my left, and Joe Rubino to my right, our Policy Director and General Counsel. Very excited about this bill, very supportive of this bill, which we worked a lot with the committee on during the 2024 interim, something that will allow our office to continue to take on business fraud and foreign adversaries in our office. Allowing our office to administratively dissolve entities that are owned or controlled by foreign adversaries, such as China, Iran, and North Korea. Just by way of background for the committee, our office takes business fraud and the integrity of our business statutes extremely seriously. Under our administration, we've performed a number of administrative dissolutions under an existing statute that, according to our records, was not really utilized, and we've dissolved approximately 60 or so business entities that we've identified as having false or fraudulent documents filed with our office, as is currently allowed by law. Although our office has instituted the administrative dissolution process for false and fraudulent documents filed with our office, something we activated in existing statute for really the first time, existing statute does not allow our office to administratively dissolve entities facially because they are owned or controlled by foreign adversaries. In the spring of 2024, we encountered a situation in which entities controlled by North Korea were found to be operating in Wyoming. In close consultation with the FBI, and after our own thorough investigation, it was discovered that the entities in question could be administratively dissolved only because of filings they made with our office and the fact that they had filed false or fraudulent filings. While I'm extremely proud to say we were the first state out of a number identified by the FBI to take action, it really confirmed our suspicion that there was a huge loophole in our statutes and one that needs to be corrected. House Bill 69 directly addresses this issue by allowing our office to administratively dissolve entities facially because they are owned or controlled by a foreign government or a foreign non-government person determined to be a foreign adversary, including China, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Russia, and the Maduro regime in Venezuela based on the definition in the bill. And this was one solution identified by our office concerning the real risks that foreign adversaries such as China and North Korea could be utilizing our business formation statutes to conduct business in Wyoming. So we're very supportive of House Bill 69 and very excited about our work with the committee on this during the interim and the continued work on this, addressing this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate it. Did appreciate working with you in the interim. Are there any questions for the Secretary? Any questions? I might ask, how do we determine ownership or control? And how do you know that? Help me out with that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think it's a conversation with our federal partners to some extent.
And law enforcement. I
Yes,
assume.
and exactly. It's a conversation with federal, state, local law enforcement. I think usually on these situations, it would probably be on the federal side as it was in the North Korea situation. Do you think that?
Yeah, Mr. Rubino, please, if you can
Thank you,
help me.
Mr. Chairman. And I'm sure you recall the conversations that we had this with the staff comments. I believe the largest conversation we had with this was during the committee's meeting in Evanston in
think that's
July and August, at the end of July, which was whether we should define ownership or control. And I think the LSO staff comment pointed to a number of different ways that you could define it. I think they looked to CFIUS. As we said then, and I believe the committee was in general agreement, is that, you know, with situations like these, the secretary is exactly right. I think we're reliant on a law enforcement investigation. The situation that we had with North Korea, we were operating under sworn affidavit from the FBI agents that were attesting that they were owned or controlled by North Korea, and they were operating there, or they were generating money for their missiles program. And so, you know, I think that when you hamstring a statute with something like that, it may have more unintended consequences.
Fair enough. So in a situation where there is a Chinese national, for example, that owns a corporation, I mean, it's not obvious on its face that that would be controlled by the Chinese government or you know, or that that individual is fronting for the interests of the Chinese government. So that on itself, just the fact that you are a national from one of the mentioned countries would not qualify in and of itself for dissolution and action by the Secretary of State's office, would it?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And I think that's one of the things when we discussed with the committee, cross-referencing to the federal regulation on what it means to be a foreign adversary, is that they're not pointing to foreign nationals. And again, to just point back, I think we'd be communicating heavily with a federal entity, whether it be the FBI or another counterpart that has the tools to be able to do that.
Gotcha. And Mr. Crossman, you want to add, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the, this is being inserted into the grounds for administrative dissolution section. There is a procedure if, with the Wyoming court system, if in the unlikely event that this is done incorrectly, that individual could appeal to our state courts to have it resolved and the entity reinstated. In the case of a entity that is actually controlled by North Korea, I highly doubt they would take advantage of that situation. However, if we get incorrect information or a person who is, say, a national of one of those, but not connected to the government, gets wrapped up, and then the federal government says, actually, we're going to dismiss it against you. This is not, you're not part of this. They would then have the chance to have that entity handled through our court system and restored. So this is not a permanent, there is a back check on this process.
You exactly anticipated my next point that I was going to make, but I appreciate it very much. So any questions? Any more questions? Is there any testimony in the room? You guys don't need to run off if, I don't think there's anybody in the room on it. Is there anybody online?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Kelly Carpenter is online.
Ms. Carpenter? Ms. Carpenter, welcome.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
You bet.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Kelly Carpenter, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, thanks for the opportunity to join you virtually today. I'll be very brief. Our members support the intent of the legislation for the steps it takes to tighten security in our state from foreign adversarial ownership. And we did appreciate that the Secretary's office did kind of quell some of our concerns that foreign nationals, that they're not unfairly targeted as well. So we appreciate that clarification and testimony today. Again, that said, I'll be brief and we'll take any questions you or the committee may have. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Carpenter? Any questions? Ms. Carpenter, are you employed by the Farm Bureau or a lobbyist?
Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Chair.
So Ms. Carpenter, just between you and me, I detest being called chair. And I
My
prefer
apologies.
chairman if just for future note, since
My apologies, Mr.
since you're a
Chairman.
real lobbyist, you don't have to apologize. You didn't know. So thank you very much. Any more questions for Ms. Carpenter? All right. Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. We appreciate it. Anybody else online? All right, committee, I think we've heard the testimony. What is your pleasure? Motion by Landon. Discussion. Discussion? Go ahead, Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, just noting that it's a clean bill that's come through the other side.
Those white bills are nice, aren't
I thought
they?
we did really good work during the interim and appreciated Mr. Rubino and the secretary. I think we narrowed the language, we wrestled with the language, and I think it's a good bill.
Anybody else? I'm also comforted by, this reminds me of our, the trademark bill as well, in that we're doing something directly and swiftly. On the other hand, we're not foreclosing remedies if we have acted in haste. And so I do appreciate that. I think this is probably a good balance of good work. Appreciate working with your office, and Mr. Secretary, and your team. Good team. Anything else? Let's call the roll.
This is a roll call vote on House Bill 69, Foreign Adversary Ownership or Control of Business Entities. Senator Boner. Aye. Senator Dockstader. Aye. Senator Landon. Aye. Senator Steinmetz. Aye. Chairman Case.
Aye. Looks like
4 ayes, 5 ayes.
looks like 5 ayes. I will say that I had the opportunity to do a business filing in your office yesterday. Walked something over by hand, and it was a most pleasant experience. Very competent staff there. Thank you very much. Anything else? Just by telegraphing kind of the intentions, we could have slipped an election bill in here today, but I thought we'd want to do the election bills all at once. So we're going to try to cram whatever election bills we get on Friday. I assume we're going to start at 8, and we'll take that up from there. So just letting people know.